If you've owned an Apple device for any length of time, you've probably heard the phrase, Apple devices don't get viruses. Maybe you've even said it yourself. I know I have. It's one of those things that's been repeated so often and for so long that most of us just accept it as fact. And to be fair, there is a reason why that belief exists. Apple has spent nearly 2 decades building what is arguably the most sophisticated consumer security architecture in the industry, the walled garden, as it's often called. But here's the thing. Over the past year or so, I've been reading more and more reports about Mac-specific malware, about zero-click exploits on iPhones, about phishing attacks that specifically target Apple users. And the numbers are genuinely surprising. According to recent threat reports, Mac-specific threats surged by nearly 400% between 2023 and 2024. There are now entire malware families, like Atomic Stealer, designed specifically to steal data from Apple devices. So what's going on? Is the walled garden crumbling? Has Apple been lying to us this whole time? Well, no, not exactly. The truth, as it usually is, lies somewhere in the middle. And that's what I want to explore in this video, because I think there's a really important distinction that most Apple users don't fully appreciate. The distinction between how secure your device is by design and how secure it actually is in practice. And spoiler alert, those two things are very different. Oh, and very quickly, before we get into the video, if you'd like a free iPhone lesson delivered to your inbox every single day, scan the QR code that you can see on screen right now, or click the link in the description to get started. Before I start criticizing anything, I think it's important to acknowledge just how much Apple gets right when it comes to security, because the engineering that underpins your iPhone or your Mac is seriously impressive. Let's start with the hardware. If you're using an iPhone or a Mac made in the last 5 or 6 years, you're benefiting from Apple's custom silicon. This includes the A-series chips in your phone, the M-series in newer Macs, and even the T2 security chips found in the last Intel models. And the crown jewel of these chips is something called the Secure Enclave. Think of your iPhone like Apple's headquarters in Cupertino. Getting a job at Apple, let's say in customer services, that gets you through the front door. You can walk around the building, you can use the canteen, use the restrooms, attend meetings, but that doesn't mean that you get access to the research and development lab where all of the secret projects live. That's a completely separate area with its own security system and its own rules about who gets in. The Secure Enclave is like that R&D lab. It's physically part of the same chip, but it operates independently within its own restrictions. So even if malware managed to get hired by your iPhone, if it somehow got installed and running, it still wouldn't have clearance to access what's inside the Secure Enclave. In practice, this means that your most sensitive information, your Face ID data, your fingerprint, your encryption keys, is stored in a completely separate part of the chip that the main operating system can't even see. When you unlock your phone with your face, the mathematical representation of your face never leaves that secure area. It isn't stored where apps or malware could access it. It isn't backed up to iCloud. It stays locked inside, and even Apple's own software can't retrieve it. The same principle applies when your iPhone encrypts your data. The actual keys that lock and unlock your files are generated inside this secure area and never leave it. To continue the analogy, if the main operating system needs to decrypt something, it's a bit like a customer services employee sending an email to the R&D lab asking them for help. The lab processes the request and sends back the answer, but the underlying secret, the key itself, never leaves the R&D lab. This is why if someone steals your locked iPhone, they can't simply connect it to a computer and extract your photos and your messages. Without the keys, the data is just scrambled nonsense. Then there's something called the secure boot chain, which is a bit like a series of trusted handshakes whenever your device starts up. Imagine arriving at a high-security building where the receptionist checks your ID, then calls up to the floor manager, who checks it again, then calls the department head for a final verification. Each person in that chain only lets you proceed if the previous person has vouched for you. Your Apple device does something very similar every time that it turns on. There's a tiny piece of unchangeable code built into the chip during manufacturing. Think of it as the original receptionist who can never be bribed or replaced. This code checks that the next piece of software is legitimate, which in turn checks the next piece all the way up until your operating system loads. If anything in that chain has been tampered with, the device simply refuses to start. It's like the receptionist finding you with a forged ID and then locking down the entire building. On the software side, Apple has built multiple layers of protection. There's Gatekeeper, which checks that any app that you try to install has been signed by a registered developer, essentially asking who made this and are they on our approved list. There's Notarization, where Apple actually scans apps for malware before they can be distributed. And there's Xprotect, which works like a bouncer with a list of known troublemakers, quietly checking every file that you download against a database of recognized threats. On your iPhone, every app runs in its own little compartment, what's called a sandbox. Picture a block of apartments where each tenant has their own unit with its own lock. The banking app lives in 4A, WhatsApp lives in 7B, and the racing game that you just downloaded lives in 12C. They can't wander into each other's apartments and rifle through the drawers. If you want the game to see your photos, you have to explicitly unlock the door and let it in. This is all genuinely sophisticated engineering. Apple controls the chips, the operating system, and the app distribution. That level of control allows them to build security into every layer from the moment that your device receives power. So if all of this is true, and it is, why are we seeing such a dramatic rise in attacks against Apple users? The answer, unfortunately, is that attackers have stopped trying to break through the walls of the walled garden. Instead, they're trying to convince us to open the gate. Let me give you a concrete example. There's a piece of malware called Amos, the atomic macOS stealer. It's become one of the most common threats facing Mac users in recent years, and the way that it works is almost embarrassingly simple. You search for software on Google. Let's say that you're looking for Notion or Slack or Adobe Photoshop. Right at the top of the results, there's a sponsored ad that looks completely legit. The website it takes you to is a near perfect replica of the official download page. Same logos, same colors, same layout. You download what you think is the real software. When you try to install it, you might get a prompt suggesting that you right-click and select Open to proceed. And because this is something that Mac users occasionally have to do with legitimate software from smaller developers, many people comply without thinking twice. Then the app asks for your system password, again, something that feels entirely normal during installation. And that's it. That's the whole attack. Once Amos has your password and is running on your Mac, it executes what I can only describe as a digital smash and grab. It's like a burglar who doesn't pick the lock on your front door. Instead, they ring the doorbell, you let them in thinking that they're from the gas board, and while you're making them a cup of tea, they're taking photos of every document in your filing cabinet. Within seconds, Amos can decrypt and steal all of the passwords saved in your iCloud keychain. It harvests cookies from your web browser, the little files that keep you logged into websites, which allows attackers to access your accounts without even needing your password. It scans for cryptocurrency wallets, and then often it deletes itself, leaving you completely unaware that your entire digital identity has just been copied. Here's the crucial point. Apple's security architecture is designed to protect the operating system itself. It prevents malware from gaining deep access to the system, from modifying crucial files, from embedding itself permanently, and it does all of that brilliantly. But Amos doesn't need deep access. It doesn't need to modify system files. It just needs you to give it permission to run, and then it operates entirely within your normal user session, accessing the same things that you can access when you're sitting at your desk. The walls of the walled garden are still very much standing. The attacker simply walked through the front gate because you held the door open for them. And Amos isn't alone. There are threats like Xloader that are specifically designed to hide from Apple's defenses, disguising themselves in Activity Monitor by pretending to be normal system processes, like a spy wearing a stolen uniform. There's even ransomware now being developed specifically for Apple Silicon Macs, like the recent Lockbit encryptors, targeting creative professionals and business owners who rely on Macs for high-value work. The common thread in all of these attacks is that they're not breaking Apple's security. They're bypassing it by targeting the one component of the system that can't be patched with a software update: you. This is a good moment to talk about this video's sponsor, Nord VPN, because what I've just described is exactly the kind of threat that their Threat Protection Pro feature is designed to catch. Remember that Amos attack that we just talked about? The fake website, the malicious download? Nord Threat Protection Pro intercepts threats at multiple points in that chain. When you land on a suspicious page, it checks the URL against a constantly updated database of known scams and alerts you before you hand over any details. It scans your downloads for malware before they can execute. And there's Dark Web Monitor, which checks if your credentials have been leaked in data breaches and lets you know if they have, because, as we'll discuss later, stolen passwords are often how these attacks begin. What I really like is that it runs in the background on your Mac, whether or not you're connected to the VPN. And when I am connected, which is usually when I'm traveling and want to catch up on news from back home that's only accessible in the UK, I know my connection is secure even on hotel Wi-Fi. Plus, you get apps for all of the major platforms, 24/7 customer support, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. If this sounds good to you, go to nordvpn.com/pht to get the best deal available, plus 4 months extra free with my link. That's nordvpn.com/pht, and that link is also in the description and the pinned comment, or you can use code PHT when signing up. Thanks again to Nord, and now back to the video. There's another area where Apple's security model has some significant limitations, and that's the browser. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Unless you live in the European Union, where recent laws have forced Apple to open things up, every browser on your iPhone is actually using the same engine under the hood. Whether you're using Safari, Chrome, or Firefox, they're essentially just different paint jobs on the same car. Apple did this to maintain control and ensure consistent security, but it also means that if there's a flaw in WebKit, every single iPhone user is affected, regardless of which browser app they prefer. In 2025, Apple had to issue multiple emergency patches for critical WebKit vulnerabilities. These are what security researchers call zero-day exploits, problems that are being actively exploited by attackers before Apple even knows that they exist. As I make this video, it's in the news this week that Apple is having to remind and persuade users to update their iPhones to stay ahead of a threat just like this. The most concerning of these threats are what's called zero-click exploits. Normally, for malware to get onto your device, you have to do something. Click a dodgy link, download a suspicious file, enter your password somewhere that you shouldn't. But with a zero-click attack, you don't have to do anything at all. Imagine receiving a letter that's been rigged to release a gas when you open the envelope. Except, with zero-click exploits, you don't even need to open the envelope. Simply receiving it is enough. The attack happens when your phone processes the incoming message before you even see it. In practice, this might work through a malicious image sent via iMessage. Your phone tries to display the image, and something in the way that WebKit processes that image allows the attacker to run code on your device. You didn't click anything, you didn't approve anything, you just received a message. Now, I should be clear about something. These sophisticated exploits are typically used by nation-state actors and commercial spyware vendors targeting specific high-value individuals, journalists investigating corruption, politicians, human rights activists. If you're not in one of those categories, you are very unlikely to be targeted by a $1 million zero-click exploit. But here's the problem. Once a vulnerability is discovered and patched, it can be reverse engineered. What was a precision tool for state-sponsored espionage can become a weapon for ordinary cybercriminals within weeks. The exploit that targeted a dissident in one country today might be used against small business owners everywhere next month. So far, I've been talking about threats to the device itself, but there's another category of risk that I think most Apple users dramatically underestimate. What happens to your data when it leaves your device and travels across a network? Your iPhone is designed to be mobile. It's designed to helpfully connect to Wi-Fi networks wherever you go, the coffee shop, the airport, the hotel, and that convenience creates an opportunity for attackers. There is a technique called an evil twin attack, and it's far simpler than it sounds. An attacker sets up a Wi-Fi hotspot with the same name as a legitimate network. If the real hotel Wi-Fi is called Hilton_guest, the attacker creates their own hotspot called Hilton_guest with a stronger signal. Your iPhone remembers networks that you've connected to before and automatically rejoins them for convenience. So it sees what it thinks is Hilton_guest, assumes that it's the same network that you used last time, and connects. Except now all of your internet traffic is flowing through the attacker's equipment. It's essentially a digital version of a credit card skimmer. You know those devices that criminals attach to cash machines that look identical to the real card slot? You insert your card thinking that everything is normal, but there's a hidden layer capturing all of your details. An evil twin network works the same way. Everything looks and feels legitimate, but there's an invisible man in the middle recording everything that passes through. Now you might be thinking, but my connections are encrypted. I see the little padlock in my browser. And you're right, the contents of your communications are protected when you're using HTTPS. but the attacker can still see which websites you visit. They can see when you're accessing your bank versus when you're browsing social media. They know your patterns, and they can serve you fake login pages that look pixel perfect, identical to the real thing. This is where I think a lot of Apple users have a dangerous misconception about iCloud Private Relay. If you're paying for iCloud Plus, you might have noticed this feature and assumed that it protects you on public Wi-Fi. It doesn't, not in the way that you might think. iCloud Private Relay protects your Safari browsing and hides your location from trackers in Apple Mail, but that's about it. It's like having a security guard who only watches the front door while leaving all the side windows unguarded. If you connect to a compromised network and then open your banking app, your email, WhatsApp, or any other application, Private Relay doesn't tunnel that data. The traffic flows directly through the network, completely exposed. This is actually the other reason that I mentioned Nord VPN earlier. Beyond the malware protection, a good VPN creates an encrypted tunnel for all your traffic, not just Safari, but every app on your device. Everything leaving your device gets placed inside this encrypted container before it enters the network. The coffee shop Wi-Fi, the hotel router, even a malicious evil twin, none of them can see what's inside. And it's not just public Wi-Fi. Even at home, your internet service provider can see the destinations of your traffic. While Apple's protections might encrypt your DNS queries, essentially the phone book lookups, they don't hide the actual connections that your apps are making. Your ISP knows that you're on Instagram. They know you're checking your bank. And in many countries, they're legally allowed to sell this behavioral data to advertisers. I want to come back to something that I mentioned earlier because I think it's the most important point in this entire video. The most vulnerable part of Apple's security system isn't the hardware or the software. It's you. It's me. It's all of us. It's the people using our devices. There's a phenomenon that researchers have started calling the safety paradox. For years, Apple has told us how secure their devices are, and we believe them because it is largely true. But that belief has made iPhone users less careful than Android users. We assume that the device is handling security for us, so we don't need to worry about it ourselves. It's a bit like moving to a city with almost zero crime. After a few years of leaving your doors unlocked and your bag unattended at the coffee shop, you would naturally let your guard down because why wouldn't you? Nothing bad ever happens here. But if a criminal did show up, you'd be a much easier target than someone from a rougher neighborhood who spent their whole life watching their back. The statistics bear this out. A 2025 study found that iPhone users are actually more likely to fall for scams than Android users, 53% compared to 48%. Android users are more likely to install security software, use unique passwords, and enable ad blockers. They've learned to be skeptical because they know that their platform is more open. Meanwhile, an iPhone user receives a text message that appears to come from Apple support saying there's a problem with their iCloud account, and they click the link without a second thought. The website looks exactly like Apple's real login page. They enter their Apple ID and password, and just like that, their account belongs to someone else. This is called smishing, a combination of SMS and phishing, and it's become the dominant method for compromising iPhone users precisely because we're not expecting it. Our email providers have spent years building sophisticated spam filters, but text messages arrive largely unfiltered. It's kind of like how experienced Londoners ignore the helpful stranger offering them directions while tourists follow them straight to a dodgy cash point. The person who thinks they're streetwise sometimes makes the easier target. There's also a newer technique with a rather descriptive name, MFA bombing. MFA stands for multi-factor authentication, that second verification step where you approve a login on your phone. In this attack, criminals who've obtained your password from some previous data breach start deliberately triggering login requests over and over again. Your iPhone suddenly fills with notification after notification asking you to approve a sign-in. The goal is either to exhaust you into accidentally tapping allow just to make it stop, or to create enough panic that you answer a follow-up phone call from someone claiming to be Apple support who helpfully offers to fix the problem if you just read them that code on your screen. Everything I've discussed so far concerns threats that exist within Apple's current security model, but there's a structural change happening right now that could fundamentally alter the baseline security of the iPhone. The European Union's Digital Markets Act has forced Apple to allow something called sideloading, the installation of apps from outside the official App Store. For users in Europe, this is already a reality. To understand why this matters, think about how Apple has protected iPhone users for the past 15 years. Every app that wanted to reach your iPhone had to go through Apple's front door. They checked the developer's identity, they scanned the code for malware, they reviewed the app for scams and privacy violations, and if something slipped through and was later discovered to be malicious, Apple could instantly disable it on every iPhone worldwide. Sideloading creates a side entrance that bypasses all of that. Now, Apple has introduced some safeguards for sideloaded apps, a lighter version of their scanning process, but it's a bit like the difference between a thorough customs inspection and a quick glance of your passport. The basic checks happen, but the detailed scrutiny doesn't. Apple's own analysis suggests that Android devices, which have allowed sideloading for years, experience malware infection rates 15 to 47 times higher than iPhones. By allowing sideloading even in a limited way, the iPhone moves closer to that risk profile. Perhaps more concerning is what sideloading enables for social engineering. Previously, if you received an email saying download this urgent security update for your banking app, you literally couldn't do it. Apps were locked to the official App Store. That specific attack vector was closed by design. Now in the EU, that door has cracked open. While Apple has made it difficult for random scammers to host apps directly on the web, the psychological barrier has been broken. Attackers no longer need to bypass the App Store's review process. They just need to convince you to trust a dubious third-party marketplace or approve a configuration profile. The simple rule of only download from the App Store is gone, replaced by a confusing array of system permissions that social engineers are expertly trained to exploit. While this is currently limited to the EU, similar regulatory pressure is building elsewhere. Japan, here in the UK, and the United States are all exploring comparable requirements. If sideloading becomes universal, the fundamental security model of the iPhone shifts from secure unless you go looking for trouble to secure only if you're consistently careful. Right, I've spent most of this video explaining problems, so let me now talk about solutions, because the good news is that most of these threats can be managed with some relatively straightforward changes to how you use your devices. First, keep everything updated automatically. I know software updates can feel like a nuisance, but they exist because Apple has found and fixed security problems. There's a setting called Background Security Improvements. You can find it by opening Settings, tapping on Privacy and Security, and then scrolling all the way to the bottom to tap into Background Security Improvements. Once you're in there, make sure Automatically Install is toggled on. This allows Apple to push critical fixes silently without requiring a full operating system update. The window between a vulnerability being discovered and being exploited can be as short as 24 hours, so you want those patches installed the second that they're available. Second, kill the password wherever you can. We're currently living through the death of the traditional password, replaced by something called passkeys. Passkeys use the secure encryption hardware already built into your iPhone to log you in. There's nothing to phish, nothing to intercept, and no code to type in. You just use Face ID or Touch ID and you're in. If you want to go even further, or if you're protecting something incredibly sensitive, then look into physical hardware security keys. These are small devices like YubiKeys that plug into your computer, but for 99% of people, switching to passkeys is the single biggest upgrade that you can make. Third, treat every unexpected message with suspicion. If you receive a text claiming to be from Apple, your bank, or a delivery company, do not tap the link ever. Instead, open the official app directly or type the company's web address into your browser yourself. Legitimate organizations do not send urgent requests for account verification via text message. So if something seems alarming, that's often precisely the point. Urgency is a manipulation tactic. Fourth, be thoughtful about which networks you connect to. If you regularly use Wi-Fi outside of your home, and most of us do, a reputable VPN has shifted from nice to have to genuinely important, not the free ones. Those typically make money by harvesting your data, which kind of defeats the point. A paid service that encrypts all of your traffic, regardless of which app is sending it. Fifth, if you download software from outside the App Store on your Mac, consider additional protection. Apple's built-in XProtect works like a bouncer, checking IDs against a list. It catches the known threats, but there's always a delay between new malware appearing and Apple adding it to the list. Dedicated security software that watches for suspicious behavior, rather than just checking signatures, can catch things during that gap. And finally, if you're in a situation where you might be specifically targeted, if you're a journalist working on sensitive stories, an activist, or simply someone with reason to believe that you're of interest to sophisticated attackers, look into Apple's lockdown mode. It significantly restricts what your device can do, but it's been remarkably effective at blocking the kind of targeted exploits used by commercial spyware. So where does this leave us? I want to be clear about something. I still believe that Apple makes the most secure consumer devices that you can buy. The engineering is genuinely remarkable. The secure enclave, the secure boot chain, the app sandboxing, all of it represents a level of thoughtfulness that no other consumer technology company has matched. But here's the uncomfortable truth that I think we all need to sit with. That engineering protects your device. It doesn't necessarily protect you from yourself. The malware that's surging on Mac isn't breaking through Apple's defenses. It's ringing the doorbell and asking to be let in, and we're complying. The phishing attacks targeting iPhone users aren't exploiting software vulnerabilities, they're exploiting our trust in the Apple brand and our assumption that the devices will somehow save us from our own poor decisions. The walled garden is still very much standing. The walls are as strong as they've ever been, but we've been leaving the gate unlocked because we assumed the walls were enough. Security in 2026 isn't something that Apple can hand to you in a box. It isn't a feature that runs in the background while you get on with your life. It's a practice. It requires a degree of healthy skepticism, a few deliberate choices about networks and software, and an understanding that the people trying to compromise your data are specifically counting on Apple users feeling invulnerable. The good news is that the necessary changes are not dramatic. Update promptly, question unexpected messages, use a VPN on public networks, think twice before entering your password. The threat landscape has evolved. The question is whether we're willing to evolve with it. Thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, consider subscribing, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.